Regarding the violent rioting that's been going on in Minneapolis for the last several weeks and the tragic loss of life that has occurred as a result of that, I would assert to you the following. These riots have almost nothing to do with the enforcement of federal immigration law and everything to do with being anti-President Trump riots. That's what they really are. So just be honest about it. These people don't care about the enforcement of federal immigration law and the protection of criminal illegal aliens. I mean, is there some small faction of the left who genuinely believes that, well, we shouldn't be deporting criminal illegal aliens? Probably. But the overwhelming majority of these people are out there rioting under the guise of opposing immigration law when the real reason is that they are anti-President Trump. Which is fine. Just be honest about it. This is no different than in 2020 when half the country went out and burned everything down, mostly peaceful though, purportedly because of the death of George Floyd, a man that they didn't really give a shit about, but they just use as a convenient excuse to riot and throw temper tantrums because they hate President Trump's guts. Okay. The left always reveals itself in their manipulation of language. So I've heard people on the left say things like, well, ICE isn't law enforcement. They're not law enforcement, which that's not actually true. They are tasked with enforcing federal immigration law. It is true that they're not like state troopers or local police officers where they would be tasked with enforcing every code and ordinance, very broadly speaking. But it's also true that it is a federal crime to interfere or impede their ability to conduct their duties, which is precisely what's been happening in Minnesota with these trains of vehicles that are blocking them at intersections and cutting them off and trying to slow them down, and throngs of hysterical women out blowing the rape whistles. It just is such an absurd scene. But I have to ask, what would be the reason? Why would you want to make that proposition to begin with, that they're not law enforcement? What's your motivation there? What's the reason that you're saying that? And you know as well as I do, the reason you're making that statement is because you want to protect the right of American citizens to go out there and impede and interfere with their duties. That's what you want. That's why you're saying they're not law enforcement, because you don't want American citizens to be arrested for blocking their vehicles, for blowing the rape whistles, for mobbing them at gas stations or kicking their taillights out, or any of the number of other things that we've seen them do, which is typical for the left. So I just can't imagine why you would want to stand by such a proposition that they're not law enforcement. It seems to me that the only rational reason that you would have for doing so is you want to protect the ability of rioters to interfere with them for the larger purpose of just getting in the way of President Trump's agenda, because after all, that's what this is actually about. These are anti-President Trump riots. So if you listen to the language that they like to use on the left, I've heard people say things like, well, ICE is out there terrorizing our communities. No, criminal illegal aliens have been terrorizing our communities. ICE is out there trying to remove and deport them, okay? They're kidnapping our neighbors. They're the Gestapo. They're Nazis. These are Trump's shock troops. Again, more inappropriate and hysterical language that is simply designed to try to elevate emotions, to try to gain support for themselves, and for them to provide a justification for what they're trying to do. It's no different than the other ways that the left likes to manipulate language, right? Men are women and women are men. And at the end of the day, those are just social constructs. Everything's just made up. There's nothing's real. I mean, it's such a destructive, anti-ideology. I just don't know why anyone would cling to that. You know, those of you who are on the left, I think we're all in large agreement that the woke bullshit and all of these other stupid things that the left does are absurd, and that you also don't support that. However, when you strip all of those things away from the left today, what's left? If you don't support those things, if you think that's just a radical fringe on the left, then what about the left is it that you do support? Because when you strip those things out, there's almost nothing left. You know, speaking of the ambiguity of language, the other statements that I hear from people on the left is that, well, you know, they're out there with these warrants, but they're not real warrants. They're just administrative warrants because immigration judges are just administrative judges and they don't have the right to blah, 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 blah. Okay, False. Remember, this is the same group of people who will insist that the 14th Amendment, because it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, well, that just means Ali Ali Oxenfree. They use the word persons. Therefore, by default, we must apply that to everyone, even criminal illegal aliens. I mean, what a stupid notion. If you take a purposivist judicial philosophy, which I think is probably the best one that you could use, you're trying to determine what was the purpose of drafting that amendment. Why did they do it? The people who drafted that, what was the purpose? Well, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are Reformation amendments, which means they were enacted and put into law immediately following the Civil War. And they were done so in order to abolish slavery, in order to guarantee that citizens had the right to vote, so on and so forth. I think it's deeply offensive, or should be, to Black Americans to suppose that, oh, well, no, they wanted to include illegal aliens in that statement as well. The amendment was there for you, for your protection, to guarantee your right to citizenship. But again, Ali Ali Oxenfree, they use the word persons, so we'll just have to include criminal illegal aliens in that as well. Bullshit. There is no right to citizenship, birthright citizenship guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. That's nonsense. They also point to the Fifth Amendment. Well, due process, no person shall be held to answer. And, any person cannot be subject to trial for the same offense, et cetera, et cetera. They use the word person, and that includes everyone, even non-tax-paying criminal illegal aliens. Really? You think that was the purpose? You think that's what they thought of when these amendments were drafted? I say, perhaps we should use the word persons. That way in the future, liberals could apply it to other groups to their advantage. You think that was the purpose? You think that was the intention of those who drafted these amendments? Get out of here with that crap. It's insulting, it's stupid, and there's no basis for that whatsoever. If you're going to claim that, you get into the minutia of these warrants, well, those are administrative warrants and only a real judge can sign a real warrant, blah, 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 blah. Really? Because when I look at the Fourth Amendment and it says no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, it doesn't specify administrative or criminal warrants, and it doesn't speak to the judges at all. So I guess Ali Ali Oxenfree, any warrant signed by any judge would be valid for the Fourth Amendment, wouldn't it? You can't have it both ways. If you're going to get into the language and the words of it like that, and you're going to ignore the intention and the purpose of why these amendments were drafted, then you have to accept it whole cloth throughout all of the amendments. You can't pick and choose where you want to manipulate the language to further your ends. So again, just to conclude this, it's silly that we're looking at this issue as though it's just, well, there are just these people who are out there that are totally opposed to enforcing federal immigration law. No, that's false. Just like in 2020, as I mentioned, these are nothing more than anti-President Trump riots. We're seeing the same thing that we saw again. You're seeing the same stupid elected officials encouraging this, and that is who's to blame for these terrible instances where people have now been killed because of their interactions with federal law enforcement. Blame the last administration, blame Tim Walz, and you blame Jacob Frey. But you put that on the backs of these officers who are out there trying to enforce the law, despite, again, the throngs of hysterical women on the rape whistles and blocking them with their vehicles. Those are crimes, and the governor and the mayor have insisted that none of the police departments in those states will help enforce those laws. So who is going to handle that? Who's going to take care of it? Whose responsibility was it? It was the state of Minnesota's responsibility to provide law enforcement and to handle that and to protect those federal officers. And they didn't fail to do so. They deliberately and intentionally did not do so, and they should be held criminally responsible for that. The whole thing is disgusting. If you hate President Trump's guts, that's perfectly fine. I support your right to do that. You have a right to protest and object. That's guaranteed by the First Amendment, but don't do so under the guise that this is really about the enforcement of federal immigration law, because we're not that stupid, and it's just crystal clear that that has almost nothing to do with this.